We humans are imperfect creatures, and that's not a bad thing. It means we strive. We build stories, worlds, and sometimes wonders. Today's story is one of those creations, born from that ambition to push the survival horror genre a little further. A lone traveler wakes in New Dawn, Poland on a snowy Christmas Eve. Hospitals bloom with rot. Apartment blocks sag under a skin of strange biomass, and old graffiti pleads from beneath the corruption. In the corners, a few stubborn Christmas lights still blink, small tired stars in a sky that's forgotten them. It's a scene of decay and quiet sorrow, yet there's a fragile beauty in it too, like hope trying to glimmer through the gloom.
ND3576. It is nice to meet you. Thank you.
This is Cronos, the New Dawn, a survival horror journey through a nightmarish, strangely poetic wasteland. It comes from Bloober Team, the studio behind the recent Silent Hill 2 remake, Blair Witch: Layers of Fear, and at first glance you'll notice it borrows a lot of ideas from survival horror classics. The question is, does it stand on its own? I would say yes. You'll feel the echo of Dead Space in its sinews and Silent Hill in its psyche, but the 1980s Eastern European setting, combined with a clever tangle of time travel, gives Cronos its own pulse. I've played the game to 100% completion and came back with plenty of notes worth sharing. Performance quirks, how the game scares you, what the story really asks of you, how the combat and level design pull you along, and what it takes to complete it all without losing your nerve. Now let's head to your favorite bar, grab a drink, and join me for today's story about the New Dawn, and see whether its fear, its heart, and its rough edges add up to a night well spent.
576. Initiating the travel log. Triangulating the fallen predecessor's last known location. Commencing search.
But before we chase the fear, let's check the wiring. How does it actually run? Cronos, the New Dawn runs on Unreal Engine 5, a beautiful, temperamental animal. Most of the time it purrs. Sometimes it coughs and bites your hand. On PC, the game can deliver impressive ruined cityscapes and fleshy horrors in great detail, but you may encounter the occasional stutter or frame dip when new areas load or when heavy effects pile on. During my sessions, I fortunately didn't have any full crashes across all playthroughs, a welcome improvement compared to my crash-prone Silent Hill 2 remake experience at launch, though I did hit a couple of brief freezes and FPS drops, especially later on in the game. Little hiccups like that are those very commonplace issues we've come to expect from many UE5 titles. It's generally stable and very playable, but don't be surprised by the odd moment of jank. Be warned, this game is heavy on hardware. My RTX 4080 GPU fans often kicked into overdrive trying to keep up with Cronos' lighting and particle effects. In fact, I have a small horror story of my own. I forgot to undervolt and ramp up the fan speed on my gaming laptop before one long Cronos session. An hour later, I noticed my GPU at a toasty 85 degrees Celsius, and I swear I caught a whiff of burning plastic. Isn't that scary? Technically, Cronos is a bit rough around the edges, but nowhere near broken. The jank shows up in isolated places, maybe an animation that doesn't register hits until the third stomp, or an explosive barrel that inexplicably needs 2 bullets to detonate. So yes, the game doesn't have the immaculate polish of a AAA blockbuster, except the occasional frame hiccups or physics weirdness, but it never degraded into an unplayable state or ruined my overall experience. If you've endured other recent Unreal Engine games, you'll know the drill. A little patience for some frame skips, and save at the safe rooms when you can, so a stray bug won't ever steal more than a few minutes of progress. We've checked the wiring, now let's feel the trigger. Time to talk combat. Your resolve will be tested. Cronos is a survival horror shooter that makes you fight tooth and nail for every precious inch of progress. This is an unapologetic game, and it's utterly dedicated to being a horror game first and foremost. Don't expect any action hero power trips from here. From beginning to end, you are underpowered, outnumbered, and scrambling for whatever resources you can scavenge. The Traveler moves with deliberate heft, not quite old school tank controls, but definitely not a nimble acrobat either. There's a realistic clunkiness to movement that reinforces that feeling of vulnerability. You can't dodge, roll, or sprint circles around enemies. At best, you can manage a determined jog. Encounters often trap you in claustrophobic rooms or narrow hallways, heightening that fight-or-flight tension, and usually flight isn't an option. Most of the time, you are meant to stand your ground and face every horrid thing that crosses your path. The design keeps pressure on you constantly. Even fleeing back to a previous area won't always save you, since some enemies will pursue you through doors. Cronos basically says, no, you're not allowed to relax, ever. And it works. I found myself in a state of heightened alert almost all the time. The combat itself is built around firearms and frugality. The Traveler starts with a high-tech modular handgun, a sort of multi-tool sidearm that can adapt into different weapon types as you find them. Over the course of the game, you'll assemble a modest arsenal of classic firearms. An auto hand cannon, 2 flavors of shotguns, 2 carbines, even a late-game BFG for when things get really personal. However, Cronos handles its weapons and inventory a bit differently than many games. Rather than showering you with ammo or letting you carry an entire military arsenal in your back pocket, it severely restricts resources and your carrying capacity. At any given time, you have a limited number of inventory slots. You can actually upgrade it a few times, but even at max, it's pretty tight. Every gun or major item takes up 1 slot. So you simply can't lug around everything at once. You have to make tough choices about what to bring on each outing. The rest of your gear sits in your stash box back at the safe rooms. This means before each foray out of a safe area, you have to deliberately plan your loadout. Do I take the shotgun or the carbine? Should I carry the bulky bolt cutters now to open that locked door I found? Or will I need that space for extra ammo and healing items? If your pockets are full and you stumble on a new key item or weapon, you can't just magically stuff it in. You'll have to drop something or backtrack to stash items in storage. It's that old Survivor horror inventory puzzle and tension, alive and well. Personally, I enjoyed the system a lot. It made me weigh every item's importance and had a consequence to my decisions. Heading into a new area felt like planning a mini expedition. I double-check my loadout and run the same anxious checklist. Enough ammo? Enough healing? And if I'm honest, the answer was usually no. Inevitably, I'd hit a moment of I need more ammo and end up in a melee scrap with a monster twice my size. And the game makes every shot count by being one of the most supply-stingy games I've played in ages. Healing items are far and few between, and ammunition is extremely limited. In fact, for the first time in a long while, I actually ran completely out of ammo during a couple of fights. That almost never happened to me, even in classics like Resident Evil or Dead Space, but Cronos pushed me to that brink. It seems balanced so that you barely have enough to survive each encounter if you're a good shot, but never so much that you feel comfortable. I often found myself counting bullets under my breath, knowing exactly how many headshots each enemy type needed, and frantically opening the crafting menu mid-fight to see if I could cobble together a few extra rounds on the fly. Speaking of crafting, Cronos features a light crafting system for ammo and health injectors using scrap and chemicals you collect. But crucially, the game does not pause when you're in your inventory or crafting menus. This isn't some survival game where you can mix herbs in safety while the world is frozen. Here, digging in your bag during battles is a real-time risk. More than once I died while fumbling to craft a healing stim pack as monsters closed in on me. Eventually, I have to learn my lessons. Plan ahead. Craft what you can before you open that ominous door, because doing it while a tentacled abomination is charging at you is a great way to get killed. Let's talk about abominations. The enemies in Cronos, called Orphans, are delightfully disgusting and formidable. Bloober Team clearly drew inspiration from John Carpenter's The Thing and Visceral's Dead Space when designing these creatures. You'll face twisted humanoid silhouettes with far too many limbs, fleshy torsos bristling with teeth and tentacles, and amalgamations that look like human wax figures melted and reshaped into spiders. There are a few main varieties of Orphans: a fast, spindly type with whipping tentacle arms, a big fat brute that can soak up shotgun blasts and crush you if it closes the distance, a crawling, wall-climbing mass of human parts that skitters around and likes to drop on you from above, and later on, some even nastier variants like acid spitters that lob corrosive goop at range. Each enemy type demands a slightly different approach. For example, those wall-crawling ones are hard to track, so you want to lure or corner them into a room rather than fighting them in an open area where they can creep around you. The brutes, on the other hand, are slow, but can easily kill you if you're not careful, so keep your distance and use your stronger firepower on them first. Despite the grotesque designs, I'll say none of the enemies are completely beyond what we've seen in other horror games. There's no singular monster in Cronos as instantly iconic as, say, Pyramid Head or a Xenomorph. But what Cronos does well is how it mixes threats to keep you on your toes. Encounters often throw different enemy types at you at once, forcing you to prioritize on the fly. Picture a cramped room where an acid spitter lurks in the back, a fast tentacled monster in the front, and a brute is lumbering in from the side. You have to make quick decisions. Which one do I take out first? The spitter in the back might whittle my health down if I ignore it, but the fast one in my face will kill me even quicker if I don't stop it. But if I focus on the fast guy, will the brute close the gap and smash me? This kind of split-second triage combined with the ever-tight ammo situation makes even small skirmishes feel high stakes. I loved that balance. It's stressful in the best way. However, Cronos introduces one major gameplay mechanic that truly sets it apart from its peers: the merge system. This is the game's signature twist and maybe your worst nightmare. When an orphan stumbles upon a corpse lying around, it can attempt to merge with the dead body, absorbing it into its own flesh. By doing so, the monster basically levels up, growing in size or changing shape and becoming more powerful. In effect, two lesser creatures can join to form one larger formidable foe, and if you're not careful, this chain reaction can happen multiple times. Early on, I learned to dread the wet slurping sound and swirling black tendrils that indicate a merge is in progress. The first time it happened, I was horrified and intrigued. I had never seen this dynamic in a horror game before. You only have seconds to interrupt the merge, usually by quickly unloading bullets into the merging enemy before it completes. If you fail, that enemy will transform into a tougher variant, what I started calling a spiky orphan, with increased health and maybe a new attack. Cronos gives you a specific tool for this purpose, a one-use flamethrower gadget that expends a resource called torch fuel. You can craft these little flame charges if you have spare scrap. The idea is that after you kill an orphan, you should burn the body so that it can't be used as merge fodder. The fire incinerates the corpse, and as a bonus, the flame burst also stuns any nearby enemies momentarily. In practice, managing this became a whole extra layer of strategy on top of just killing monsters. I had to think about when and where I killed enemies. If I was in a tight spot, I'd try to maneuver so that the corpses would lie in a corner or somewhere I could easily torch without exposing myself. I had to decide which enemy to kill last so that I'd have time to safely burn the others. Torch fuel isn't super plentiful, so you have to be judicious. Most of the time, you just won't have enough fire to burn everything, and you'll be nervously looking over your shoulder for any sign of merging. It's a bit like managing the Crimson Heads in the Resident Evil remake, where you burn zombie bodies to prevent them rising nastier later, but here it's happening in the moment during fights. It kept me constantly thinking in combat not just how do I survive right now, but how do I prevent the fight from getting even worse. By mid-game, burning corpses became second nature. As soon as I had a breather after an encounter, out came the torch to char the remains before moving on, even if I know that spot won't spawn any more enemies. And if I ever got complacent and didn't burn the corpses, Cronos would inevitably punish me with that spine-chilling sound of an orphan merging somewhere behind me. It's a fantastic mechanic that reinforces the game's themes, the idea of disinfection assimilating everything, while also being a fun gameplay challenge. With all that said, how does the gameplay feel moment to moment? In my opinion, Cronos delivers a gameplay experience that is simultaneously familiar and stressful in the right ways. Yes, if you've played the likes of Dead Space, Resident Evil, or The Evil Within, you'll recognize a lot of Cronos' tricks, sometimes to a fault, as it isn't shy about borrowing ideas. The protagonist's suit and overall vibe sometimes feels like a direct homage to Isaac Clarke. It doesn't reinvent third-person horror gameplay, but it executes the fundamentals very well. And crucially, it commits to the survival part of survival horror. Combat is punishing, inventory space is limited, every door could hide death. That commitment gave me the kind of thrilling stress that I remember from older horror games. Nearly every encounter in Cronos had my heart rate up, not because it was impossible, but because I knew any mistake would cost me dearly in health or ammo. If you played smart and pay attention to your surroundings, Cronos is actually pretty manageable. Once I learned enemy patterns, kept my weapons modded and loaded, and always had a contingency plan, I found I could get through most fights on the first try. In that sense, it's challenging but fair. This isn't one of those modern games where you feel helpless and constantly die. It empowers you just enough to survive if you're careful. In fact, some might find that as the game goes on and you upgrade your gear, you become a bit too good at dealing with threats to the point where the final boss, for example, might feel a tad underwhelming in difficulty. I honestly found the last boss easier than several earlier sections of the game. It was a cool encounter story-wise, but in terms of challenge, I was expecting more of a fight. So don't be shocked if the climactic battle doesn't chew you up as much as you anticipated. The real difficulty of Cronos, to me, was front-loading in that learning curve and in the constant pressure to use my resources wisely. I do have to mention one disappointment, the melee system, or lack thereof. The Traveler can perform a basic melee hit, but it's extremely weak. It's truly a last resort and often not even worth it except against the frailest enemy or to finish off something almost dead. I understand they don't want you feeling like you can just punch your way through the game and conserve ammo, because that would defeat the whole scarcity design. Still, a part of me wished the melee had a little bit more oomph. Perhaps a risk-reward heavy attack that could stagger enemies if timed right, or some upgrade to make it viable when you're desperate. As it stands, if you run out of ammo and only have melee, you're basically in deep trouble. It's a small gripe, but worth noting. Cronos really wants you to use your guns and gadgets. Swinging fists is really not a thing here. But maybe that's just me. Give it a few months and someone will inevitably post a punch-only run that proves me wrong, clearing the whole game without firing a single bullet. Before wrapping up gameplay, a quick note on level design and puzzles. The game is fairly linear in progression. Each chapter or area is self-contained with a clear start and end, and once you move on, you generally can't go back. The maps themselves often have a bit of looping, interconnected layout. Think like a mini Resident Evil style map where you might unlock a shortcut door to loop back to the safe room, etc. But ultimately, you are moving through the levels in a set sequence. There are locks and keys, generators to power up, passcodes to find, the usual suspects. The puzzle design is fine, if not particularly groundbreaking. You'll occasionally need to backtrack after finding a key item to open a door you saw earlier. Because of the inventory limit, that sometimes means trekking to a stash to grab, say, the bolt cutters or a special tool you left behind, which can get a bit repetitive. By my 100 or so locked door that needs item X which I left in storage, I did sigh a little. However, I'll admit, Cronos usually telegraphs these needs. You'll often know you're about to need the bolt cutters, or an access card and safe rooms are placed such that the backtrack isn't huge. And often behind those locked doors are worthwhile goodies like extra upgrade materials or lore, so I rarely felt my time was wasted. It's just one of those slightly old school design quirks that you either won't mind or you'll find a bit tedious. The game even pokes fun at itself. At one point, the Traveler herself mutters about this at the second train station in the game, which got a laugh out of me. They know it's a trope and they lean in.
One more to go. This is getting repetitive.
I finished my first run on normal and then did a new game plus on hard difficulty. Interestingly, Cronos' hard mode doesn't actually make enemies' HP spongier. The standard enemies seem to take the same number of hits to down. Instead, the differences I noticed were that the enemies hit a lot harder, so your mistakes are punished more. A few enemy placements were changed or upgraded. For example, where you might meet a weak enemy on normal, it might be a tougher variant on hard, and the autosave frequency was dialed way back. Essentially, on higher difficulty, the game expects you to rely on manual saves at safe rooms, and you can't depend on frequent checkpoints to bail you out. This makes every stretch between safe rooms much more tense. I actually appreciate that design. It keeps the survival balance intact but ups the stakes and tension by making death more costly and enemies more lethal. Hard felt like a really classic survival horror experience, doable even on a fresh start, but you'd better play near flawlessly in each section or you'll be repeating it. And yes, I did repeat a few sections, but it never felt unfair, just intense. Now, mechanics keep you alive. The atmosphere steals your nerves. Let's step outside. From the moment you take control of the Traveler, Cronos the New Dawn drenches you in atmosphere. There's no gentle onboarding, no long tutorial explaining the world. You're dropped into a bizarre decaying city with almost zero exposition. That intentional disorientation is powerful. You feel like a stranger in an even stranger land, and dread begins to creep in naturally. The town is a wasteland of twisted anatomy and Cold War-era melancholy. Imagine brutalist Soviet architecture, all concrete and sharp angles, now broken into impossible shapes and fused with pulsating organic growths. Buildings are frozen in time and shattered in space, as if reality itself had been split open. Hallways loop back on themselves. Stairwells lead to nowhere, and gravity isn't always playing by the rules. It's as if the past and present overlap in impossible ways, a literal fracture in time caused by the apocalypse. Honestly, many areas feel like surreal haunted houses out of a nightmare theme park. There's the decaying apartment block, the obligatory menacing hospital, an eerie church, a claustrophobic industrial facility. All the classic horror locales make an appearance. Yet each zone manages to feel distinct and dreamlike in its presentation, thanks to those haunting, fractured layouts and the game's flair for visual storytelling. I jokingly think of it as a theme park of horror approach. Each level is a new ride through a different horror trope, but Cronos executes it so well that it never feels cheesy. Instead, it's consistently unsettling and bizarre. So, how scary is it? The horror design in Cronos is all about sustained tension rather than constant startles. It feels more haunting than outright horrifying. Some players might even say it's not the scariest game they've played. I'll admit I rarely had to pause and turn on an extra light to calm myself in the way something like Fatal Frame or the scariest Silent Hill entries might make you do. But I was constantly on edge, neck hairs raised, controller clutched tight, utterly immersed in the decaying world and always anticipating the next threat. The game's commitment to keeping you off balance, low on ammo, low on health, unsure of what lies beyond the next door, creates a palpable, relentless tension. You don't need a jump scare every minute when the world itself feels hostile at every step. Even safe havens feel temporary. On the whole, the fear factor in Cronos ramps up gradually. The early areas are eerie and unnerving, but I thought I was handling it pretty well. It was like, okay, creepy, but I'm fine. Then I reached the hospital level, and that was a different story. Damn, that hospital. The atmosphere there is next level. The dim flicker of failing fluorescents, the hallways choked with biomass and body bags, the distant sound of something walking on tile, occasional bursts of static and screams. It's horror perfection to the letter. Even after multiple playthroughs, that level managed to get under my skin. I knew exactly when and where the jump scares would happen, but it still didn't matter. My heart pounded every time I crept through those corridors. To be honest, I might have a bit of hospital PTSD for a while thanks to Cronos. It just illustrates how Cronos prefers to go for the slow, psychological scare and the thick atmosphere punctuated by a few well-placed frights, rather than a constant barrage of loud shocks. By the end, I appreciated this approach. The game kept me uneasy for hours on end, which is its own kind of fear. It reminds me a lot of why I love this kind of game so much in the first place.
I feel it in my bones. Something bad has happened.
The world has its claws in us. Now, let's meet the story that tightens them. At its core, Cronos the New Dawn weaves a strange, time-twisting tale of humanity's last stand, and the lengths will go to undo our mistakes. You play as the Traveler, an enigmatic operative encased head to toe in an H.R. Geigeresque armored suit. In the story that begins in the far future, long after a cataclysmic pandemic called the Change has ravaged the world. The Traveler awakens in an underground facility and receives a mission from a shadowy organization known only as the Collective. Their task? Travel back into the past and retrieve essences of key individuals, essentially the distilled memories or souls of people who played important roles in the events leading up to the Change. By gathering these essences and ascending them into the Collective's hive mind, the hope is to piece together what caused the apocalypse and perhaps find a way to avert humanity's grim fate. It's a compelling high-level premise that mixes sci-fi and horror. Think Netflix's Dark meets Tenet and Dead Space. You aren't just exploring one timeline. Time rifts allow you to slip between the devastated future and specific moments in the 1980s, shortly before everything fell apart. This means the game's narrative and its level design cleverly span two eras. The bleak post-apocalypse of New Dawn's future and the last days of normal life in communist Poland circa 1984. Exploring an abandoned apartment in the 80s with children's drawings still on the wall and propaganda posters in the corner, knowing that an unimaginable horror is about to befall this place, gives those sections a tragic tension, and it hits even harder because you saw a glimpse of its future. That interplay of timelines is one of my favorite aspects of Cronos. The environmental storytelling really shines through, letting you witness effects and causes in a unique way. Crucially, Cronos keeps its storytelling mysterious and favors player-directed discovery over exposition. Yes, there are cutscenes and bits of dialogue, but a vast amount of lore is buried in optional notes, diary entries, and audio logs scattered throughout each level. If you're the kind of player who loves poring over every document to reconstruct the full plot, Cronos will reward you with surprisingly rich narrative tapestry. In fact, even as a lore enthusiast, I found the first half of the game a bit overwhelming. The story throws a lot of proper nouns at you from the start: the Collective, the Traveler's vocation, essences of predecessors, a disaster called the Change, the New Dawn. It's a deluge of terms without immediate explanation. The game eventually clarifies most of these, especially by the end when you've gathered more essences and intel, but the early hours definitely require some faith and patience as you piece things together. My advice is to embrace that confusion as part of the experience. After all, your character is also in the dark and discovering things alongside you. And it does pay off. Those puzzling nouns and hints start clicking into place one by one as you progress. What kept me invested, even during moments when I wasn't 100% sure what was going on, were the themes and the tone of Cronos' narrative. The story is drenched in melancholy, moral ambiguity, and that specific Eastern European fatalism that gives the horror a heavy gravitas. The apocalypse in Cronos feels personal. As you wander the doomed town of New Dawn in the past, you encounter ordinary people facing impossible choices. Through notes and echoes, you get references to things like quarantine orders, ration lines, families trying to escape, and even anti-vaccine conspiracy pamphlets. All part of the societal breakdown around the change.
should bring ice cream, remember? I'm safe with me.
It's hard not to draw parallels to our own real world. Bloober Team has said the game wasn't directly inspired by COVID-19, but the reflections are definitely there. Reading a desperate diary from a citizen complaining about lockdowns and disinformation, all while literal monsters roam the streets outside, creates this darkly ironic resonance. It grounds the fantastical horror in something relatable and painfully human. And then there's the collective, the organization you ostensibly serve. They are portrayed with an ominous mystique. As the story went on, I often found myself questioning, are we really the good guys trying to undo a tragedy, or are we agents of some dystopian hive mind that might have its own questionable agenda? The game drops hints throughout that not everything is as it seems with your orders. That ambiguity only deepened as I met the few surviving NPCs and saw their perspectives. Cronos doesn't parade a large cast of characters, but those who do appear leave an impression that will last. The traveler herself starts off almost robotically detached. She speaks rarely, and when she does, it's in a flat, mission-focused tone. Early on, it's actually a bit hard to connect with such an emotionless protagonist, and the fully concealed face adds to that distance. Yet, as the story progresses, especially as she harvests more essences, small cracks begin to show in her demeanor. We witness subtle flickers of humanity in her voice and actions. The game even ties this to gameplay. Every time you absorb a new essence, the traveler experiences disturbing psychic visions and auditory hallucinations, hinting that the memories of the dead are chipping away at her stoicism. It reminded me of Isaac's dementia episode in Dead Space 2, those moments when the protagonist's mind frays and nightmarish visions bleed into reality. By the end, I found myself far more attached to the traveler than expected. The writing and Kelly Burke's nuanced voice acting slowly humanize her. Even behind the helmet, you catch tones of fear, resolve, and even a dry wit at times. In one optional scene, she gently comforts a dying person, and then moments later, you hear her snap back to reciting her cold mantra. Such is our calling, like she was reminded herself to feel nothing. It's subtle, but it worked on me. I started rooting for that tiny spark of humanity inside her to win out.
I don't try. Whatever is left of his mind will soon fade away. He will be gone forever, and with him only the answers we need. The steelworks, the outbreak, his mission, my awakening. I need to make sense of it all. It's not worth giving up yet.
By contrast, another key character, the Warden, provides a foil to the traveler's severity. He's an older man in a similar armored suit, but clearly he's been wandering this wasteland much longer and has shed some of the collective's dogma. Voiced by Alan Turkington with a kind of weary warmth, the Warden maintains the machinery in the safe zones and occasionally guides you via radio. More importantly, he remembers what it's like to be human. Through some wonderful optional conversations, you learn the Warden has a fondness for old music, for the lost people of New Dawn, for life. Their dialogues pit duty against empathy, protocol against personal feeling, and those moments ended up being some of the narrative highlights for me.
Don't you think it's all trivial?
In perspective of perpetuity, what isn't but a trivial thing? What's the endless existence worth, deprived of even a moment of introspection and unadulterated joy? For some reason.
In a game filled with grotesque monsters and dire missions, a quiet chat in an underground bunker with a disillusioned old soldier turned out to be genuinely affecting. It brought home the theme that even in the apocalypse, what matters is how we hold on to our humanity. Now, without giving anything away, I will say Cronos' story really builds to a crescendo in its latter half. The identities of your targets, the nature of the change, and the true motives of the collective eventually converge in a series of revelations that made me literally slap my forehead and go, oh, of course.
Listen to the will of those who will not speak. And if the tools are not willing, they will be. Their will be considered. Fold. And the fold removed.
Is that kind of twist one you could have foreseen, but probably won't on a first run, and it's all the more satisfying when it clicks into place. The final act recontextualizes much of what came before. I even found myself rereading a few early notes with new understanding after finishing, appreciating how well they seeded the mystery. In summary, Cronos: The New Dawn tells a grim and fascinating story if you're willing to meet it halfway. It may stumble in its pacing. The middle portion of the game drags a bit with few plot developments for a while, and it may confuse you early on with an overload of lore, but it absolutely sticks the landing with an impactful finale. The narrative isn't aiming for trophies, it's simply good, and good is enough. What lingered for me wasn't a grand calculus of saving the many, but something smaller and more frightening. It's rarely the monster that ruins us. It's the man with the big gun who wants a bigger one, and the other, desperate, blinded by love, who'll do anything to keep it. For a game full of fleshy mutants and sci-fi riffs, Cronos understands that human want is the sharpest horror. That's a big part of why The New Dawn sticks after the screen goes dark. In the end, Cronos: The New Dawn is a flawed, ferocious, and fascinating entry in the survival horror genre. It may not blaze a completely new trail. Instead, it walks a path trodden by giants like Dead Space, Resident Evil, and Silent Hill, carefully placing its feet in their footprints while carrying its own bundle of new ideas. The result is a game that feels at once nostalgically familiar and refreshingly audacious. Yet it stumbles here and there. The combat, while intense and satisfying, sticks a bit too closely to convention at times, and lacks some of the dynamism or innovation of its inspirations. The level design occasionally pads the runtime with fetch quests and repetitive gauntlets that we've seen before. Technical hiccups and a touch of that trademark Bloober jank remind you this isn't a top-shelf AAA production. You'll endure some frame stutter, a few wonky animations, maybe a reload due to a stuck character once or twice. And despite an intriguingly original premise, the storytelling can be heavy-handed with lore and slow to reveal its secrets, which might alienate players who want instant clarity. Yet, when you're crawling through a pitch-black corridor lined with churning flesh, heart-pounding as your last bullet drops a monster that was inches from tearing you apart, all those flaws fade into the background. What shines through is the heart and soul of Cronos, a heart that beats in terror, yet preserves. A soul that yearns to reconcile humanity's past mistakes in a world gone mad. The game's atmosphere is second to none, enveloping you in a beautifully bleak vision of the apocalypse that somehow finds room for hope and cats amid the gore. Its narrative dares to be contemplative, layering emotional and ethical weight onto the blood-soaked action. And in its best moments, perhaps a desperate boss fight where your hands shake from adrenaline, or a quiet dialogue that unexpectedly makes you reconsider your mission. And in its best moments, perhaps a desperate boss fight where your hands shake from adrenaline, or a quiet dialogue that unexpectedly makes you reconsider your mission, Cronos delivers that special something we crave from horror games: meaningful dread. Dread not just for what may jump out at you, but for what it all means. Playing Cronos: The New Dawn to completion left me with the kind of satisfied melancholy that only a solid horror story can evoke. I reflected on my choices, on the fate of New Dawn citizens whose lives I had glimpsed through letters and echoes, on the traveler's arduous journey and what it ultimately cost her. Of course, a review should temper praise with clarity on who will enjoy the game, so who is Cronos: The New Dawn best suited for? If you're someone who loves the classical survivor horror formula, limited ammo, save room sanctuaries, creepy lore logs, and edge-of-your-seat combat where victory is never assured, then Cronos is an easy recommendation. In many ways, it's a love letter to that style of game, executed with enough skill and its own little twists to feel worthwhile. For fans of Dead Space or The Evil Within, Cronos will feel like meeting a spiritual successor. Not as groundbreaking as those titles were in their day, but certainly a welcome comrade in arms. If you adored Bloober Team's Silent Hill 2 remake, and you're curious how they handle an original project of their own, Cronos proves the SH2 remake was not a fluke. It shows Bloober can apply their atmospheric prowess to a new IP and largely succeed. On the other hand, if you prefer your horror games fast-paced or revolutionary, Cronos might seem a bit old school. It doesn't try to reinvent the genre, it iterates on tradition. If your idea of horror is more the roller coaster style, with constant jump scares and explosive set pieces, you might find Cronos more slow-burning and methodical than you'd like. There are stretches of quiet, of solitude, and exploration, where the game builds atmosphere at the expense of immediate action. Personally, I found those stretches effective, like a creeping dread that fills the silence. But it's definitely channeling the pacing of older horror classics rather than modern action horror hybrids. For me, Cronos the New Dawn scratched a very specific itch. It gave me a meaningful, moody survivor horror experience of a kind that we don't get too often nowadays. It's not perfect. In fact, some of its imperfections become part of its character, much like a rough-edged but passionate indie horror film. Hours after finishing the game, I struggled to fall asleep. But it wasn't the nightmare-inducing Orphans that were keeping me awake at night. It was the weight of the final decision. That's the kind of horror Cronos ultimately delivers, one that follows you out of the game and into your own thoughts. In an industry crowded with soulless jump scare rides, Cronos stands out as a title with a soul, or rather an essence of its own. So, is Cronos the New Dawn worth your time? If you can forgive a bit of roughness and you relish survival horror, my answer is absolutely yes. It may lurk in the shadows of bigger budget titles, but it deserves to step out and be seen. Some have cleverly summarized that Cronos contains the essence of survival horror, but doesn't always have the spark to bring it fully to life. I agree to an extent, and yet it's precisely that essence that makes it special. The game's flame may flicker at times, but it never goes out. By the final credits, I felt that spark. It illuminated a grim, compelling world I was ultimately glad to have survived. In the end, you might say Cronos is a patchwork of a lot of other games, and maybe it is, but in my opinion, it's unique enough to stand on its own. It doesn't surpass the genre's defining masterpieces, but what it does well, it does extremely well. Well, enough for me to recommend it to anyone who's a fan of survival horror. It's a must-try for those who appreciate the genre's classic form. Bloober Team has cemented itself as a trusted voice in horror with this game, proving they can craft more than just remakes. They can create new nightmares that are well worth exploring. As I put down the mouse, I even found myself murmuring the traveler's own closing words, "I will carry on where you left off." In context, that line is the traveler vowing to carry the torch for those who fell before her. In a way, Bloober Team has taken the torch passed down by the horror greats of the past and carried it forward with Cronos the New Dawn. The flame flickers and sputters at times, but in the darkness, it shines brightly enough to guide any horror fan through one hell of an adventure. Thank you for spending your time with me today. If you're still here, I'm grateful, truly. Different stories, different opinions, same respect. If this story gave you a good time, a like helps more than you think, and you're always welcome to subscribe and stay for the next one. Take care of yourself, stretch, drink some water, rest your eyes. I'll see you in the New Dawn.